One of our supporting partners sends me a verse of the day, and one verse recently startled me with its profound message. If we are living with an ungodly leader, then God will bring disturbing consequences not only on the leader and his or her advisors and family, but also on all the people under that person's control. The verse is 2 Chronicles 21 verse 14, but let me first explain the context. Elijah the prophet was speaking for God and cried to Jehoram, the ungodly king of Judah, with these words, "The Lord is going to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and all your possessions with a great calamity." Why would all the people have to suffer because of an ungodly leader? I was really stunned by this biblical truth, which sent me rushing to the Word of God to find more information, which I will share with you now. God's Word emphasizes by repetition the dire consequences to the people when there is an ungodly leader. I am going to take you to the narrative of Jehoram, who reigned for 8 years as the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. We learn that he did evil in the sight of the Lord. But let's start with Jehoram's father before him, because his father was a vivid contrast to this, because he was a godly leader. Jehoshaphat, the father, reigned for 41 years in Jerusalem, and we learn that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, like David, his father. So we need to begin by carefully considering what was right with God. Jehoshaphat considered allying with the king of the northern kingdom of Israel because the Arameans, who lived east of the Jordan River, were threatening to invade, conquer, and destroy. The king of Israel was the wicked Ahab, who relied on pagan prophets for guidance. Abraham gathered 400 prophets who all agreed that Israel and Judah would win the battle. But to the credit of Jehoshaphat, he insisted on hearing from a prophet of the Lord who was Elijah. This prophet of the Lord declared that the Lord had put a deceiving spirit in the 400 prophets of Israel. And Elijah, speaking for God, proclaimed disaster against the northern kingdom of Israel, whereupon King Ahab put the prophet of the Lord in prison. The rest of the story is really quite funny. Ahab declared that he would disguise himself as he fought in the battle, but Jehoshaphat should put on his royal robes. However, when the enemy soldiers came to attack, the Arameans recognized Jehoshaphat as the king of Judah, not the hated king of Israel. So the enemy warriors turned back from pursuing Jehoshaphat, who was spared from death during the battle. Now, what do you think happened next? The story takes an ironic twist. A certain man from the Aramean army drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel in a joint of the armor. Well, what are the chances that a random arrow would strike Ahab? Pretty slim, because hitting the tiny opening of a joint between 2 pieces of the armor is simply improbable. Yet that is what happened to King Ahab of Israel, and he died. Jehoshaphat returned to Jerusalem. Now it's time for us to discover moral messages in this narrative that apply to our lives today. I see 4 themes, but you may see more. First, we need to carefully select those with whom we associate. When Jehoshaphat chose to join Ahab to fight against the Arameans, he was attaching himself to an ungodly companion. So you must ask yourself, who are my friends and associates? To what extent have they influenced me? Have I been able to resist any ungodly influences? Have I exhibited my own godly behavior that has promoted godly change in the other person? Now comes the second moral message. Where do you place your trust? Jehoshaphat learned a tough lesson. He began by putting his trust in a huge army that included soldiers from both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. From a worldly perspective, that made good sense. However, the problem was who Jehoshaphat trusted. Was it in Ahab, who was amassing a large army? Or was it in God, whose prophet Elijah had declared that the Israelites would lose the battle? Which brings us to the third theme. To what extent do you seek guidance from God? Ahab's 400 prophets all agreed that Israel would win the battle, but they were just trying to please their king with what he wanted to hear. Jehoshaphat had a sense that something was wrong, and he insisted on hearing from a prophet of the Lord. This prophet spoke the truth, but it was something that Ahab did not want to hear. Unfortunately, Jehoshaphat also turned away from the true prophet's words because he joined the battle. But God was still with him and preserved his life, whereas Ahab, who was doing evil in the sight of the Lord, was killed. So let us carefully consider the extent to which we place our trust in the Lord rather than in worldly people and situations. First, and perhaps the most important approach to trusting God is to thoroughly know what is right and what is wrong, and to be able to discern between truth and lies, which is becoming more difficult in our world of social media. We call this godly discernment what is morally right, or what is righteous in God's eyes. And now we come to our fourth theme. How do you communicate with God to know the direction in which He wants you to go? Through prayer? Through quiet contemplation? Are there times when you sense that certain events or actions are spiritual signs? Each one of us communicates with God in different ways. How do you communicate with God? It is time now to turn to the son of Jehoshaphat, who was Jehoram. Jehoram is the evil one. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. We learn that Jehoram walked in the ways of the ungodly kings of Israel by doing evil in the sight of the Lord. So now we need to learn exactly what he did that pleased God, the consequences of his actions, and the messages that we can apply to our lives today. Jehoram's first act upon ascending the throne of his father was to kill all his brothers. Why do you think he did that? Eliminating any competition guaranteed his complete control and power as king of Judah, with none to counteract his ungodly ways. Then he married the daughter of Ahab. She had been raised with pagan beliefs and methods of worship, and she undoubtedly had a significant influence on her husband. So what are the lessons for us today? Again, we see the disastrous consequences of associating with ungodly people. But even more significant is the influence that an ungodly leader can have on his people. We must resist any person of authority who deliberately works through overt actions or devious manipulations to gain ungodly power and authority over the people. The tragic result of following an ungodly leader was first demonstrated in ancient Greece, where the city-state of Athens developed the first democratic government. Political decisions were placed in the hands of free male citizens. Each year, 500 names were chosen from all the citizens of Athens to serve in the government for 1 year. During that year, they were responsible for making new laws that would benefit the people. When a new law was proposed, all the citizens of Athens had the opportunity to vote on it. To vote, citizens had to attend the assembly on the day the vote took place. This form of government is called a direct democracy, in contrast to the representative democracy that we have in the United States today. Democracy in Greece ended with the emergence of a middle class that resented the economic power of the aristocracy. In the midst of growing discontent and frustration, dictators emerged by promising the people what they wanted to hear. Such promises were never performed. Instead, the Greek dictators remained in power by using mercenary soldiers from outside of their respective city-states. Let's return now to Jehoram, because there are very important messages in this story. We see in the biblical passage that Jehoram had to deal with wars and rebellions. We learn that the Edomites revolted under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. Then Libnah revolted at the same time. Thus, a unified and peaceful country began to split apart under the authority of the ungodly king of Judah. Does that sound familiar? Unfortunately, this hostile division is occurring in our own country today, even among God's own people. Jehoram also made high places in the mountains of Judah for worship of pagan idols, and we are told that he caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot, which is symbolic of sinful actions. Thus, this ungodly leader intentionally led Judah astray, and the people were susceptible to succumbing to these ungodly pressures. Why would Jehoram cause the people to act in ungodly ways? I suggest he was giving them what they wanted instead of taking the more difficult path of encouraging them to do what was right with God. The people succumbed because they were receiving their worldly desires. So what were the consequences of these evil actions? God told Jehoram that he was going to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and all your possessions with a great calamity. But wait a minute. Why must the people suffer painful consequences? Weren't they innocent bystanders who were taken in by an ungodly leader? Well, God does not overlook sinful behavior just because it may have been caused by another person. After all, God tells us to stand for what is right with God. And Yeshua tells us that we will likely be persecuted if we stand for God. But that is what God is asking us to do. Yes, there will be ungodly leaders, but don't succumb to their enticing words. Just stand for God and do what is right in God's eyes, even if you must withstand persecution. Shalom.